So, same time next week?
Well, of course.
Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
It took me a long time to be able to say Chandler has cancer, because that is such a scary word. St. Jude takes care of absolutely everything. And knowing that we don't have to pay for all of the medical expenses, that's huge.
St. Jude allowed me to focus on being a mom to Bryce. And sometimes I'm just in awe of the impact St. Jude has, not only on this community, but the world.
San Jude nos ha dado todo. Nos está dando la salud de nuestra princesa. Y sin pagar nada.
St. Jude is uniquely positioned to advance the cures of pediatric cancer, I think better than any other institution in the world.
Donors are important to us because you get the feeling that you have a team behind you. We have the resources and we have the focus. And so if St. Jude doesn't do it, who will?
Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is John Harris of the Tennessee Firearms Association. John, in the wake of the Florida shooting, so many of the survivors and their parents have been so outspoken, and particularly the young people have been particularly articulate. Isn't it hard to argue against someone who's actually had those automatic rifle bullets shot at them?
Well, first, they were semi-autos, and I think there's a story out now that they were even standard capacity handgun rounds, a lot of them.
But still, no, people who saw it has been shot at.
They've been shot at, no doubt, and they have an emotional response to the horrific tragedy that they've been through.
If that happened to you, would that make a difference in your life?
I would go get training and be prepared to carry. I don't know that I would surrender my weapons and take the position of, if it ever happens again, I want to be a victim.
This whole situation, this whole debate that's come up has become so polarizing. I mean, you've had all these things that showed up on the internet with people saying that the folks who are speaking out were actually crisis actors, people who were planted there by the FBI and others just to kind of stir up anti-gun, gun control legislation and stuff. Is there any real place for that? Shouldn't those people who are doing that be certainly the things taken down and they're maybe even prosecuted for maliciousness?
Well, those are ad hominem attacks, which I think is the weakest form of rhetoric. You know, I don't care if they're crisis actors or not. I don't even look at that issue. The issue for me is, what are they saying, and is the argument sound and backed up by data?
Is there any way to find common ground at all on firearms legislation in this country? It doesn't appear to be, looking at where both sides kind of come from.
Well, I think there's some. For example, there's a bill running by Senator Roberts to eliminate the sales tax on gun safes.
Here in Tennessee.
Here in Tennessee. And it's got common ground support. There's a bill running to use forfeiture funds to fund SROs that I believe has bipartisan support.
But when you hear gun control advocates saying they want common sense legislation, aren't they kind of saying if you're against it, you don't have common sense?
Yes. Oh, yeah. That's a direct attack on the rational arguments.
But on the other side, you see some members of Congress just in the last week or so who say that what they don't need is more gun control, they need more idiot control. Now, is that really the way to have a productive debate on the issue?
Well, it depends on if they're, when they make that phrase, if they're talking about the opposition in their arguments or the shooters.
Well, one of them said that the shooters are all Democrats.
Yeah,
now, that'll polarize it real quick.
They definitely are polarizing in that context. I think the issue really becomes, ultimately, and this is where common ground ought to be attainable, is there a mental health component, and how do we deal with it?
What needs to be done in the area of mental health? The president's talking about having states and cities go back and reopen the old asylums and the other things like that rather than do it in the community. Is that a way to deal with some of the problems?
I think you've got to almost go down that path, because we have a continuum on mental health. As we said earlier, if you have someone who's like those parents in Florida who's lost a child suddenly, they could be subject to mental health diagnosis for acute depression. Then you have people that are chronic, long-term, severe mental health. But when we use the phrase mental health,
most mental health people are not dangerous necessarily.
Most are not. By large margin, most are not. And we have legal remedies now, like involuntary committals, to deal with the people that are an immediate risk of threat to themselves or others. And what we have is people who don't fall into that category but become dangerous before they're caught.
You mentioned a parent suddenly losing a child. You also have a situation in Tennessee, leads the nation in this, an incidence of unintentional shootings where a firearm is not properly locked or kept up and a child gets it, shoots themselves, shoots somebody else.
It's unfortunate.
And that's obviously goes to good handgun, being a good handgun owner. Yet efforts in the legislature to try to do something about that, perhaps put some criminal penalties in, get opposed by gun groups. Why?
Well, part of, and it's not just the gun groups, but part of the problem is it was a negligent act, not an intentional act, and they're sort of balancing this public policy issue of, if we put the parent in jail or put the kids in DCS custody, is that the right solution for what was an unintended tragedy?
But how do you make people better gun owners? Because there are many, many, many guns out there.
Oh, there are. I think one thing you do, and there's a bill running on this, is to require more and earlier education, like we do with sex education or driver training in our school systems, to improve the teaching directed towards kids as we go, particularly from a rural to an urban state. That guns have to be respected. They're not a toy, they're not a plaything, they're not a video game. And then you have to also encourage parents to take it more seriously.
Elections are coming up. The most recent polls show that guns are going to be a more important issue as voters make up their mind one way or the other. You don't endorse candidates in the Tennessee Firearms Association, but you do rate them. Tell us about the process you go through with that.
The process that the Tennessee Firearms Association goes through is we send out a questionnaire, a multiple choice typically questionnaire, asking the candidates who qualify what their position is on a variety of topics. We then score that numerically, just like a multiple choice test. We don't inject our opinion in it as to who we like or don't like. And then we disclose that information on our website, and part of what we disclose is actually scanned copies of the responses. So someone can click on that candidate's name and see the actual response and whatever handwritten notes they may have put on it, so that we're as transparent as possible.
You don't give money. The NRA gets a lot of heat about the money they give. You do not make campaign contributions.
We do.
Have a PAC?
Actually, in 2016, we invested more money in campaigns in Tennessee than the NRA did.
Do you expect to be doing even more of that in 2018?
We will. TFA will commit about the same amount of funds in our budget towards that in 2018. I don't know where the NRA is going to be. They spent a fortune here in 2012, and then they disappeared in large part.
And just very briefly, you do this mostly for the state races. You do not get involved in the federal races.
We do not. We're not registered as a federal PAC, and we do not take a position on federal races.
John Harris, Tennessee Firearms Association, thank you for joining us for this discussion, and we'll probably have you back here in the future. And thank you for joining us on Inside Politics this week. Hope you'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get enough politics in the meantime, go to the NewsChannel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's a new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Goodbye.